Our guest tonight is Derek Kolstad. Derek is the writer-creator of this iconic John Wick franchise, which has become the most profitable Lionsgate franchise.
How good to see you again so soon.
He most recently wrapped as the co-executive producer and part of the writing team for the highly anticipated Disney Plus series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Please welcome Derek and Tova.
So, I was telling him, and I'll say again, that I usually don't watch, I don't see sequels, but I've seen all the 3 movies of John Wick because they're just the coolest. And the quality and the fun just make them almost like a standalone movies. So I'm a huge fan, which is why we asked you here, and I know that everybody else is. So how did you start in the business? And really, I just want to hear maybe from the time you came to LA to be a screenwriter until you sold.
Well, I mean,
script.
like
the
all
overnight success.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Like all of you guys, I mean, I grew up loving movies, and the one anecdote before getting to that was grew up in a Christian household, and I was a shitty liar, still am. And I was this height at the age of 12, and so I never got carded going to R-rated movies, and I excitedly came home, and my mom said, "What did you see?" And I was like, "RoboCop." And you know, that was a horrifying movie at the time. And I excitedly told her the entire plot of the movie, and I left, and she looked at my dad and said, "We should probably encourage him in this." So thanks, Mom and Dad. But it was, Madison, Wisconsin is a lifetime, a world away from LA, especially pre-internet. And even though I started writing screenplays at the age of 13, before Microsoft Word, we had WordPerfect, and I programmed a template for a screenplay and just started writing it for myself. So I'd write 2, 3, 4, 5 screenplays a year and put them on the shelf or save them, and that file would get fucking corrupted and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know how to do this, so I watched movies. I loved movies. At the age of 26, I was a consultant in Chicago. I worked for Dale Carnegie, and I taught sales managers how to build and staff their sales teams. Exciting. And my little brother called, and he asked me how I was doing. I just started crying. And I'm not an emotional guy. And I realized I had to fail at this. And so it was about 2000. I drove out to LA in a Gulf TDI that had been shipped over from Germany without a governor's switch. It was a diesel little thing. Half my back seat was taken up by a 19-inch CRT monitor. And people just glaze over at the tech. But anyway, I knew one guy who worked at Azusa Pacific University that I went to kindergarten with, and I crashed on his couch out in San Dimas. That's where I started. And this was before, it was with email and stuff, but I was spending $200 and $300 a week printing out scripts, you know, putting in the brads, buying straight edge razors to actually run along the sides so that when people opened up, it just felt good, you know. And I got noticed right away because I wrote a screenplay called The Wayfarer, and it was just a cool title. It was a sci-fi horror, which it was a couple of years after Event Horizon, so it was kind of in that mix, and it had 2 black leads. So at the time, everyone, of course, thought that Derek Kolstad was a black man. And I'm not, but I had a lot of very interesting meetings of walking into Spike Lee's company, and they're like, "Who are you?" But it was a great experience, and I got to know a lot of people. And the only problem is I had the corporate thick skin. I didn't have the industry thick skin. Like, I came from Midwest corporate where handshake, where's your bond? Hollywood is very different. You hear yes all the time. And then you get to a stage where you want to hear, go fuck yourself, because you're like, oh, thank God, you know?
Right.
And so I walked away for a little bit, but kept writing and kept watching. And I would still write 3 to 5 screenplays a year, put them on a shelf. And I wrote this one called Acolyte. And Sonia, my wife, who we lovingly refer to as a script bitch because she's the first line of defense. She is my editor, and she's better at this than me. She makes me a better writer. And she read it, and she's like, you should try it again. I got a manager. I did 2 direct-to-DVD movies that were an ungodly challenge, and yet you're still kind of, you know, proud of them because of what you went through. And I was like, I'm done. You know, I've lived a happy life. I like writing. It makes me happy. And so I was going to walk away, and the one producer on that project that I liked, named Mike Callahan, introduced me to Mike Goldberg and Josh Adler, who were managers at the time, and they're currently still my reps, and they saved me. You know, the first one we went out with was Acolyte, got optioned for $1,800, which, hey man, you know, that was 3 months of rent. And then I wrote Scorn, and Scorn is what John Wick became. And I wrote it after watching Faster with Dwayne Johnson and Harry Brown, both of which movies I was just like, they were okay, you know. And my thing about John Wick is, you know, I love, it's an homage to the movies I grew up with and loved. You know, you mentioned The Green Room in the 70s, and I always love, you know, in even the old Bond movies, they'd refer to a character, and you wouldn't see that character for 2 or 3 movies down, but you didn't know who he was at the time. And so when you think that I wrote that initial screenplay in 3 days, the second draft in 2 weeks, I sold it in February, and we went into production that November.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so when you think of overnight success, I know I'm blessed. I worked hard to get to the point where I get to work hard, but that's kind of, you know, a little bit of the journey. And the interesting thing is we initially went out with that script with directors, and all the directors that we met with were like, don't get the dog, it's not enough, let's give him a whole family to slaughter. And, you know, instantly, our whole thing is, it's not the dog, it's the dog. And that's not the point. Like, we've seen that, and it made sense to this character. And suddenly and it was a Friday, 11 o'clock in the morning in Basel, the producer called me, and he's like, we just got a weird call. Keanu Reeves called to ask to read the script. Are you cool with that? And I'm like, fuck yeah, you know? And so they couriered it over to Keanu, and I got a call an hour and a half later, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just waiting for your call, you know? And he's like, can you go over to his house? I'm like, fuck yeah, you know? And so I live in Pasadena. He's right above, I mean, he's in Hollywood A-star, you know, super land. And, you know, went up. It's just him in this really nice house, but it's not overly ostentatious for a guy worth $500 million. Walk down, and usually, as you guys well know, you meet someone famous, and they tend to be smaller. And he's my height. And he's very congenial, and you know, I can't do a Keanu. And he's just like, Derek Kolstad. Like, Keanu Reeves, you know? And the thing that hit me is, as I'm walking past his office, I shit you not, he had 300 scripts on his desk, because he loves what he does. He reads all the time, and I'm not pandering when I say, when you get his notes, they're not just for his character, it's for the story. He loves it. But it kind of hit me that this is the one we're meeting on, you know? And so he and I worked on the screenplay for 4, 5, 6 long weekends in a row. And during that time, I tell this story way too much, but I love it. There was a knock on his door, but he's got like one of those little, you know, 2-ways. And he's like, hello. This woman says, hi, my name's Christina. I'm on a road trip from Chicago with my family. We're just really huge fans. Can we ask you some questions? He's like, okay. We go out this driveway. There's a minivan with a family of 5 from Chicago. Christina is sophomore in high school, and Keanu Reeves walks out, and they're like, holy shit, it worked. And they talked for a little while, and they asked some questions, and he was the sweetest thing in the world. And of course, them being Midwest, we're like, oh, don't want to bother you. And then we went back and we sat down, and I was just like, fuck, we've made it, you know, this is pretty cool. But Chad and Dave came about because some of you guys probably saw Chad when he did something, John Wick 2 with her.
No, that's like a whole new
Oh,
people.
it is? So Chad was Keanu's stunt double on The Matrix. And once you get to know Chad and you watch The Matrix, I love that movie, but now it takes you out of it because you're like, okay, oh, that's Chad. Okay, oh, that's Chad, you know? But they've known each other for years, and they've always been, you know, Keanu is a huge tech guy. So he, at any given time, is over with the DIT and the lenses, and he loves that kind of stuff, so they just geeked out on that, and he was the biggest fan of them, and they were the biggest fan of him, so that's where it came about.
So, but let me ask you something, because I've seen screenwriters, many, including Robert Bolt, which, you know, people don't know here, but wrote all these historical movies, were nominated for Oscar, and they said that they wrote screenplay, and then one day something clicked, and they wrote the screenplay that sold and got made. And when they looked back, they understood why the previous screenplays didn't really sell. So there's a moment of that it clicks. Did you have that kind of moment in John Wick?
You know, a little bit, because, you know, one of the weirdest things is when you think of John Wick 1, 2, and 3, it took place in the last 5 years of my life. That's really, really fast. And so I don't think I'm quite yet to the stage looking back on the first one that it clicked. But I think when I wrote John Wick, I was writing a love letter to the movies I loved. And I think a lot of times when it clicks for people, it's they dive back into the stream unintimidated by the movies that they wanted to be swimming with, you know? Before that, I was writing smaller movies. I was writing monster movies. I love horror. But horror is a different beast, so is comedy, you know? But I think with John Wick, I can have people talking like from Howard Hawks movies. I can have a guy like Winston over-talking. Like, no one talks like that. You know, it's like a stage play. I can refer, and I can build out, and I can peel back the onion, and I don't need to explain everything. And yet, as the writer, be satisfied with it and want to do more, you know? So that, I think, is true. Like, it was John Wick was me just kind of suddenly going, I'm going to stop trying to be who I'm not and just fully fucking embrace just what I love, you know?
The premise is just so unusual, because it's like the audience get a glimpse into, you know, the International Assassin Association, so to speak, you know, with the rules and ethics and all of it played against very elegant and striking visual, you know, backgrounds. It's very unusual. And then on top of it is the dog, so you stack the thing there. But how did that idea come, the core idea? You know, the pitchable idea of that setup. And by the way, I just noticed today when you cut into, you know, the Continental Hotel and the orders come in, and the phones are like from the 50s or something, right?
Well, I think that's one of the things we've always joked about is if you throw tech in a movie, it's comical 18 months after the fact. And so we love the idea of throwing in, like, of course they use, you know, 50s era equipment, because in this world it just makes sense. It's reliable. They own the lines. No one can tap them, you know, that kind of thing. No one would think to tap them.
Yeah.
And you know, when you think of the Suicide Girls and guys and the look and feel of the world, a lot of that has to do with all of our love of the Warriors, you know, where you had these various gangs, and I'm sure you've all seen the movie, and it was like, how do you bring that in but more grounded, right? And then the other thing, too, is I grew up with Alistair MacLean and Dashiell Hammett and Agatha Christie and all those mystery action thriller writers. And then the movies of the 70s you talk about, I bring up 3 Days of the Condor all the time, because I think one of the greatest characters ever made was Max von Sydow's Gilbert in that movie, because he's this really calm, kind killer who is also the oracle and is also the chorus in the choir saying, this is how it's going to happen. And every time I say that line, I get goosebumps, because he's also alluding to a world larger than that. And so that's where it kind of came about. And you know, when you go down the rabbit hole of seeing an actor you really like and then going into their filmography, you stumble upon movies like The Outfit, where you're like, what is this, you know? And then you track down the writers of those books, and then you track down Spencer, and suddenly you keep going closer and closer to what I grew up with, which James Cagney and, you know, White Heat and all of those classic gangster movies.
Yeah, but still the world here, that whole, like, walking into almost like a secret society with its own rules and stuff, except it was, instead of grimy, it is just so kind of upscale and elegant and international, but, and the orders and I think that is fantastic. And the action, of course, is like unbelievable. I mean,
the most fun about the action is, I like writing screenplays with pros so that, you know, a lot of times it's for the actors. We know full well the action is going to be different by the time it goes to production.
I was going to ask him.
But like in the first one, when you have the classic red circle action sequence, there's a scene where John shoots a guy's foot. The guy leans forward and he shoots his head. And I'm the guy in the audience going, because I wrote that, you know? And so I wrote all these action sequences. And then John grabs the guy's head, puts it on the tape, shoots him 3 times. I was like, I didn't write that, you know? But that's where we could geek out, because Chad and Dave, you know, they've got what we always call it the back pocket black book of action sequences and kills and stunts they've always wanted to do, and they threw everything they could at it.
I know, but the way they do it is like, you don't just have cut. It's like you have widescreen, and this is going, it's like a ballet of thing going on for like 5 minutes in a sequence, and it's actually happening, and, you know, it's doing his own stunt. Keanu, oh my God.
Yeah, and the thing about Keanu is, like, you know, and this one with Bob Odenkirk as well, these guys train their asses off. They're in the best shape of their lives. At the end of the day, when you see them, you wouldn't recognize them, just because it's like, if you guys remember being in sports in high school or even now, like your face droops, and you know, you walk alongside some of them, you hear their knees, you hear their shoulders, but they're just in heaven. And yet, the only way you can get those long takes is if they train and train and train and train. And when Keanu and when Odenkirk train, it's judo, it's jujitsu, it's getting your ass handed to you, so that the number of times that they're thrown through a plate glass window and it's them, or the way that, you know, Keanu describes it is like, he walks out, the car hits the stunt double, but it's him that goes rolling to his feet. He's like, that's still like, you know, you go do it, Kolstad. I'm like, no, you know? I don't own a piece of this, you know. So.
Yeah, I just write the shit.
Yeah, but he's also one of those guys that like more. Like I remember after the first table read, I think in the first draft there was 13 kills, you know, and then by the time we got to shooting, there's 88 or something, and we had this table read, and it's so funny because they hire a voice actor to read the script, and there's like 9 pages of action at a certain point. We're all just laughing. At the end, someone said, "Man, that's really, really violent." And Keanu goes, "But it could have been so much more." And he got 2 and 3, so, you know.
Incredible. Okay, I want to open up for the student to ask questions. Guys, don't be shy.
Hey, Derek, thanks for coming out. I just wanted to talk about your process a little bit more. So I'm interested to learn how you became efficient in your writing. What was the tipping point in your craft that allowed you to deliver high-quality pages in a timely manner?
Honestly, it came down to, you know, we always talk about the 10,000 hour rule. You guys have heard that 1,000 times, I'm sure. And I think for me, it's the 10,000 page rule, which is maybe not exactly 10,000 pages, but you get to a point where you begin to hear voices in your head from various editors and readers in your life without hearing them. And also you realize that more often than not in the movies that I love, and the movies I want to write, the city's a character, the building's a character. So spend a line or two. You love your hero, you love your hero, you love your hero, and you want to stay with your hero. And then you realize that when you deviate from the hero, what the people are talking about and what they're trying to say and do affects your hero. I mean, that's genre to me. That's what I love about it. But when you think of the efficiency of it, our favorite scenes in movies don't have anything to do with the plot, you know? I always think of Ronan's one of my favorite movies. I bring it up all the time. And if you want to write, watch that weekly until you sell something.
Which one?
Ronan, Frankenheimer's Ronan. because there's so many just lines in there that can be throwaway lines that you realize, oh, that's character, you know? But I think the other thing, though, too, is don't be afraid to write out the dialogue, write out the narrative, write out the conversation, read it, and render it out 3 pages into a look, a nod. We were talking in the green room about, you know, the old Westerns, and you can say what you will about some of them. You can have a monologue, or you can have a certain guy tip his hat, and the tip of the hat speaks more. So in regards to efficiency, the other thing too is go way back. You know, watch Harold Lloyd, watch, you know, Buster Keaton, watch the old silent movies, and just see how they tell a story without any kind of dialogue. And that was a godsend to me. So I hope
By
that
the way,
answers.
Billy Friedkin thinks the same way. He refers to the same thing, yeah.
Freaking, dude.
Okay, hello. I want to ask you, when you were writing the first John Wick, did you already had Keanu Reeves in mind, or you had another actor?
No, I grew up in an age when Beta and VHS was just coming out. And my mom knew I loved movies, so whenever she got groceries, she'd pick one out of the bin. It was 50 cents, because they were all off trademark, you know, at the time. And so I got to know old actors very young. So when I write with actors in mind, they're long dead. So that's Paul Newman, dude. You know, that was my Paul Newman in my head. But when we got to casting, the funny thing is, there were 4 or 5 offers on John Wick, and we took the smallest one because they wanted to make it now. And as a writer who wanted a career, that's what you go for. One of the offers was, you know, they wanted to make a $60-70 million with Bruce Willis, but the reality with that is you'd make one and be done. And I think when Keanu came up, he wasn't going to break the budget, he wasn't going to break the bank, and we all knew full well that if we made a movie that was critically and financially okay, we had a franchise, but it had to be encapsulated in a good standing. So when Keanu Reeves came up, it was literally like me going, huh, oh yeah, you know. And honestly, he the only reason he has a beard in that movie is he showed up and he had the beard, and when we were thinking of shaving him, Chad and Dave were like, nah, let's do the beard. And we got all this shit from all the various online communities, and then when we saw the first trailer, you're like, can you imagine a clean-shaven John Wick? That's just disturbing.
And how many chapters you have in mind?
You know, it's funny because, like, when I first talked to Keanu on the set, because you slowly peel back the layers of this world, I'd love to go for as long as we can, you know? But it's a studio franchise now, and the control that we all have to a certain respect has been given up, you know? Not usurped. It's a team across the board, but I want to help out as best I can and forge as long as we can. But come the end of it, he's my grandfather, he's my hero. You want him, you know. To me, the scene we've written in every movie, because we thought it might be the last, is John, quote unquote, dies. You're in Belize. You hear the sound of a familiar engine. You see a puppy in an alley. You see some feet walk by, and someone scoops up the dog. And to me, that's how I'd love to see it end down the road. But who's to know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, there are so many action movies on the market. What do you think made John Wick stand out from the others that have had so much success?
You know, she had said something in the introduction. It's one of the reasons that those Korean thrillers that I love so much, like I wrote the remake for Man from Nowhere, which is one of my favorites, is you spend some time with the character. You love the character. You want the hero. You want the hero's journey. You want to follow him. And at the end of your movie, right before credits, you're like, that was worth my time. I'm glad he got there. I want to see more. But also, it's like just the reality of, like, I was in love. I love the hero. And I think a lot of the action movies we see, they focus on the action. When you go back to the movies that I grew up with and you love, like Die Hard's a great example. You watch it as a kid, and you're like, this is a great action movie. And at the end, you hear John McClane scream out his wife's name as he's literally bleeding out, and you realize, oh, this is a love story. You know, it's a man who still loves his wife. Or even like, I get shit for this, but I'm gonna say it. I love the first Kingsman. I think that's a fun.
Which one?
The first Kingsman.
Oh,
I think it's a fun fucking movie. But the best scene in that entire movie is when Eggleston is across from Michael Caine and he says the line, "I'd rather be with Harry." And I get goosebumps every time because in that moment you realize it's a father-son movie. And I think that's why a good movie, regardless of genre, is a good movie. Is it comes down to character and the relationships and you wanting to be a part of that character's life.
thank you.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Klauser, and my question is, have you ever thought of expanding on the John Wick universe, and if so, like, can you tell us about it?
You know, it's funny because like with the television show, which that's Lionsgate's baby, non-writing EP, and the video games and stuff. I do what I can, but I think with John Wick especially, is I created it, I nurtured it, I laid the foundation. But when you come to the various other splinters, I'm encouraging certain things, but I'm also off kind of focusing on building out other franchises and foundations that in a perfect world come the fourth iteration of that, those worlds combined. Because I never think anything, I hate the word canon. I don't think anything should be canonical, you know? I know, in the Star Wars MCU of it all, but what I would love to see, I don't want to see prequels, you know? In fact, the original iteration of John Wick 2 is a surprise prequel. The original script was, the last act was the impossible task, and you realize, oh shit, he was doing this all to get out, right? And then we realized we were just being too witty. It just wouldn't work, you know? But in regards to that universe and that kingdom, when you got a cornerstone like Ian, Winston, and Lance Reddick is just a joy, and Keanu, and all that kind of stuff, I'll be a part of that in a certain respect, and I wish it the best, man.
Thank you.
But you did the comic book and stuff like that. But that's different than expanding.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with I edited a bit, but
I see.
It wasn't really creative.
I see.
Because the other thing too is, comic book writers, they don't make a lot of money, and the guys I've worked with are incredibly talented and hungry. I tell those guys, like, just do your thing. What do you?
Right.
You know, I played Han Solo and Chewbacca in the sandbox. I didn't want George Lucas to show up and go, "You're doing it wrong," you know? So, like, I just want people to play, you know?
Mr. Kolstad, I saw you mentioning earlier about action scenes, and what I wanted to know as an aspiring writer as well is in regards to action scenes, how much into detail do you go? Like, just for example, on this third John Wick movie, the scene where they're like throwing knives at each other. There's something that I never saw any action movie do, which is just like, I'm hearing this thud because the hand is not the knife that's hitting, it's the handle. And I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. Is that on the script as well?
Okay, I like I said at the beginning, I can't lie. That's all Chad, that scene. And it's my favorite scene in the movie. We had talked about it, and one of the things I loved about it is when they first start throwing the knives, they don't have the gauge right. So they're hitting, clunk, 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 and at the end where it's like, sink, 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 and you're just like, oh shit, you know? But a lot of times the way I'll write an action scene is just make sure that the first couple of hits moves. I don't use technical terms because everyone will glaze over. But if you take out a knee, if you say the leg folds at an unnatural angle, if you say that they give as good as they get, you'll come up with these phrases and you just kind of feel yourself. The last thing you want to do is read 3 pages of a fight. Just focus on the first couple of hits and those moves. Make sure that the environment is a character. Everyone likes it when a guy seems to be taking a hit. In reality, he's shifting so that the other guy can lose balance and his face on the table. Introduce the table earlier as a character in the scene. And just make sure that it's a dance and have fun. If you yourself get bored with the scene, you're doing it wrong. And what I'll say is then just cut it in half and see if it works. But a lot of times, just play like you're playing in high school, where it's like, and then I flip you over and then I throw you, and just have fun. If you're not enjoying that aspect, I mean, come on. Like, most of my rewrite work is dialogue, and at a certain point, ugh. But when people are like, okay, we need a car chase scene, you're like, fuck yeah,
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Do you think about just write the story of the like a prequel of John Wick? I mean, his past, what happened before he become the best assassin. Think of.
Yeah, in fact, we had talked about it, and the hard thing is we kept bringing up a movie like Unforgiven, right? Which is all seen, but he has that one line where it's like, I've killed women and children and all that kind of stuff. And the hard thing was twofold. I hear Scorsese's Irishman is awesome, and they've talked about doing the de-aging stuff and going young. But it's hard to see or to watch a guy who was the Baba Yaga become the hero and then return to him being full-on Baba Yaga. And I think for all of us, it was like, I don't know if I want to see that. I almost want to hear about it. It's like, I remember in Jaws, the best scene is the USS Indianapolis discussion between Robert Shaw and the crew. And he talks about the sharks eating all of his, his buddies. And it's the best scene in the movie, and it's just this story. And they actually talked about maybe doing Jaws 2 as the USS Indianapolis. And they realized, even today with tech, it's not as good as the stories you hear. So the stories about John Wick will continue to, grow and build in the franchise. But going back to see what he came from, we just kind of feel it would just kind of take away from the franchise as a whole.
From the whole mystery of him and who he was.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So I often find, I'm sure everybody in this room finds filmmaking is problem solving. So I figured a lot of people could benefit from this question. What main hurdles do you feel like you faced during production? And what tools and lifelines do you utilize to get through them?
So John Wick 1, we were all in the trenches together. It was an independent. It was financed out of 15 different pools. And yet, on the last day of shooting, once we had wrapped, the movie was in the black. And then they sold it to Lionsgate, and it did what it did. And it was really the home video side of things that wanted a second one. Second one was the hardest, most difficult thing I've ever done, and I would never do it again, ever. And part of the reason was, at that point, you were part of a success, and suddenly the studio was more invested, and they were invested at a time where they needed it. And suddenly the core group of people that I was dealing with in the notes were backed up by 15, 20 execs and people where it got to the point where, like, I don't know who this is, And then the third one was really me recognizing, oh, this is the devil I know, John Wick 2, I crawled in the bottle a bit, and I crawled out. It sounds very after-school special, but you will all be there. But to be honest, at a certain point, it goes back to why I wrote John Wick in the first place, is one of the things that saved me is in the middle of John Wick 2, and this is a weird thing to say, is the trailer for Mad Max Fury Road came out, and every night I would stand in front of my TV with that. It's the best trailer I've ever seen, with that music, and I just stand in front of the TV, and I felt like that 11-year-old who snuck into an R-rated movie, just going, ah. And honestly, it was my love of movies that got me into it, and my love of movies that got me out of it. But, married well, friends well, family well. And I think the other thing, too, is regardless of who you are and what you want to do, every day I write one new page. No matter, I think right now I have 21 projects in various states of play. I still spend at least one page a night spec. Or if you've had a terrible day, just fucking write fade in. It's the greatest feel in the world,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
First of all, thank you very much for everything. It's nice to meet you. My question is about screenplay too. I want to know, what do you think it's better when you start to write a screenplay? Let's say, if you have a story in mind, or it's better to start with the story and then find the theme, or in the other way around?
It's funny because that goes back to Screenwriting 101, and everyone has any number of answers to it. But I think a lot of times it's just start, And it depends on everyone's means and methods are very different. I doodle, and then when I write, I sprint. I love being at the computer with the, what would you call it, the blinders on, you know? But I think too is, there's a reason the story came to you. There's a reason that you gravitate towards the character whose story you want to tell and whose perspective you have. I think the theme is there as soon as you start writing it. It's really uncovering it. But that's my truth in that respect. But I've noticed that the movies I loved as a kid, like they got their claws into you quick. And part of the reason they got the claws into you quick is you realize that the movie's like, dude, I got this thing to tell you, you know? And I think the two go hand in hand, and sometimes it's buggy before the horse or horse before buggy. At least it is for me.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so because the movie was so long and we have to finish at a certain time, I think that's a good time to us to close this out. I just want to thank you for coming, and we love that franchise, and I hope that, when is number 4 coming up?
Don't know. No. We're still talking. I mean,
so
there's got to be at least a 4. You know?
What happens? We need another one. We just need another one. That's for sure. We're not ready to give it up. We need another one.
Yeah.
And that is from somebody who doesn't watch sequels. So I just want you to know. And hopefully there's going to be another franchise from all the 21 projects you're working on.
No, the most, Nobody started shooting today. I'm doing this one with Gerard McMurray called Booker over at Sony that I'm super excited about. But yeah, I love what I do, man.
And you're very successful at it, and you write really super, and the whole team around it also. It's kind of a lucky thing because you can write and it goes into the wrong hands, and then, but when something is good and it gets into the right hands, and now you have this team, and it's just like, it's like you have a recipe and the thing comes out of the oven really good every time, right?
Yeah.
So that is really very, very important, because the truth is you never know how something is going to turn out. But we thank you so much for trekking all the way here and teaching and answering the questions. And those are the filmmakers and the screenwriters of tomorrow. And
Very
one
cool.
day they'll mention you in their acceptance speech.
What a douchebag.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.